Live. Hello. Welcome to Health and Happiness at Work. This is season 3, episode 2 of my podcast. My name is Katie Tombaugh. I'm the founder of a company here in Columbus, Ohio called Wellness Collective, and I work primarily with employers and employees to bring health, fitness, safety, and well-being directly into the workplace and the workday. A little bit of housekeeping, I guess, is just to let you know that this platform and this way of delivering the podcast is newer. For the first 2 seasons, I did produce the podcast in studio. There was a little bit of editing, I would say, that happened. For the most part, I did just sort of show up and speak. But yeah, it's a change, I would say, going from a professionally produced podcast to this platform, and especially putting this out into the world live. So proud of myself for doing that. I appreciate you being here, tuning in, listening. It could be that one day we have lots of people here live with me and engaging in real time, or it could be that you're consuming this as a replay. It's all good. My theory is I need to put it out into the world, get some feedback from you all, and we'll go from there. So with that, as you're listening, if you hear something that you like, give me that feedback. If you have a desire or feedback for future content or a suggestion for how we do this podcast, I would love to hear from you. As it stands, these podcasts are released pretty much monthly, but as with most things in life, consistency is king, is my thought. So I'm really considering going live and podcasting more frequently. I think going live more frequently would help with building a community here, having more interaction live and in real time. And I'm leaning toward the idea of a Wellness Wednesday consistent go live. We do something similar with our Free Fitness Friday. So every Friday, I actually stream a live full body workout at 12 Eastern. So check that out if you haven't already. But with that, I'm going to get us kicked off with today's topic. And I might just leave you hanging one more moment to tell you my approach for these first few episodes, at least of season 3. I've really been working with themes. So I think it's important to share that with you. A monthly theme, a monthly word, idea, value, topic to unpack. So I wanted to share that with you, that we are headed a very specific direction in terms of a theme today. Another thing that I think that is important in addition to themes is this idea of patterns, because oftentimes with health and wellness, we can identify patterns that are really insightful. So you'll hear me talking about that, looking for patterns of opportunity, looking for patterns within the workplace and workday. So I wanted to share that as kind of my thought process is how can we use themes and patterns to really open up some conversations around health and wellness. And again, my intention is to give you opportunity to apply the learning or the ideas in your own life, in your own workday. But then I'm also hoping that when I speak or when I podcast, that there's opportunity for the magic that can happen within the workplace and the workday. So with that, today's topic is inspired by the December blog, and it is why and how compassion shapes personal and cultural transformation. So how can we take the concept, the value, the feeling of compassion and use it in our own lives to produce some positive benefit? But then additionally, what does that look like as a culture? And more specifically, I meant organizational culture. So how does this principle, again, value, feeling of compassion really change the experience of the workday and or the workplace? So I talk about the workday and the workplace a lot, but what's even more important than that are the people that make up that community. So you'll hear me use those words often. What I want to talk about next, I think to also tee up this topic of compassion is to just spend a little bit of time addressing this idea of feelings and feelings in the work environment. I've heard people say things, especially in my industry of wellness and health, how much does the employer want to be involved in employees' individual lives? Like I've heard things like if people smoke, that's on them. I'm not going to dictate what they do. And so there are some folks that think just because the employer doesn't mean that I'm going to intervene or try to stage an intervention, if you will, on certain aspects of the individual employees' lives. Similarly, I've heard people recently say in the workplace that maybe we're too concerned about folks' feelings. And I think some folks are feeling as if we have to tap dance around what we say, what we do, be sensitive to all the things. And I would argue, or it seems that some folks aren't enrolled in that idea, that we're having to be too intentional or too sensitive and can't just say what's really on our minds. And so, I am going to challenge that a little bit, because my logic is that, again, we spend more time at work than anywhere else. There are a lot of relationships at play. There are a lot of dynamics at play. The workday can be highly dysfunctional. So for all of these reasons, personally, and as a consultant, I'm really interested in how do we have a workday that people enjoy, where people can be authentic, where people can have tough conversations, but where it's a great place to be. We are, again, optimizing the workday. It doesn't feel awkward. There's no conflict, because maybe we've all had that workday where it's incredibly uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable because somebody's having feelings and we're not able to talk about it. And there's a lot of a passive aggressive behavior going on. And it's just generally kind of sucks, right, to walk into that. And so maybe you've been on a team where there's some kind of dysfunction like that and people aren't able to talk about it. Maybe there's been the kind of challenge where you have things on your mind that are difficult at work, or you have things that you're navigating personally and nobody checks in with you, so you're not really invited into a conversation. And again, I'm just sharing all of this because personally, I believe we do need to have a vocabulary for talking about feelings in the workday, and we do need to have communication skills that allow us to talk about feelings, because I think feelings matter. There are people, again, who are going to think about business and, they'll say things like, it's nothing personal, it's a business decision. But I'm in the business of people, and I think we need to handle people responsibly, is I think where I'm going to land with that. For your entertainment, I'm realizing that I think my inbox is still open, and I'm hoping it's not, because you're going to hear every single email that pops into my life in this moment. So I'm kind of peeking to make sure I don't have anything open. Okay, I think we're in the safe zone there. With that, I feel more ready to kick us off with today's topic. So as I've sort of teed up so far, I see compassion, which I'll define for you here in a moment, as a vehicle for positively impacting the workday, our lives, us as individual people, and us as a community or culture. You've probably heard me on past episodes, if you've been with me before, talk about the power of language. I think language is so important in the workplace, in the workday. Anytime we're gathering and exploring a topic, if we're not all speaking the same language in terms of defining things the same way or seeking to understand things the same way, it can make it a little difficult to have that conversation. I do think anytime many people gather in a room, you're going to have unique perspectives. Not everyone is going to agree. But again, having some working definitions for the topic at hand is important. In preparing for the topic of compassion, I looked at a lot of different definitions to see which might be the right fit for the direction I was headed, my application, my interpretation of compassion in the workplace and the workday. And so I just want to share with you the one that I landed on as maybe the most, the one that spoke to me the most. So compassion can be described as the desire to alleviate the distress of others. I'll say that one more time. I like to, especially if people are driving or multitasking or working, I like to offer it up more than once. So compassion can be described as the desire to alleviate the distress of others. Now I want to unpack a few words even more now that I've shared that much. The word desire is powerful. Desire is an incredibly strong emotion. It is a want. So it's kind of this want or this calling to help others in times of distress. And gosh, I could talk about stress for probably 365 hours. I joke that it's a lifetime topic potentially for some of us, how to master stress, how to understand and process stress, etc. But I'm really interested in the word distress. So technically the word stress in and of itself is a more neutral term, but the word distress implies some kind of suffering, some kind of wearing on the individual. So when we are under distress, we are definitely not flourishing. We are definitely not feeling at our best. Yes, we are potentially suffering in some way, but I like to say that a situation or a scenario is potentially wearing on us, and it's having some type of chronic or lasting effect. What we know about stress is that it's a demand that's placed on someone or something, and that demand can elicit or produce a change. So sometimes we go through something that is perceived as feeling stressful, and we get to the other side of it, and we're clear on how it's changed us and how we want things to change. And generally, those are kind of acute situations, or even if we have a brief or short experience of stress or a demand being placed on us in our work day, it can actually really heighten performance and focus. And it's as if we kind of rise to the occasion because of the demand that's placed on us. And generally, when we have the skills to do that, we feel empowered, and we think of it as being psychologically healthy when we get to the other side of it. And technically, when we get into psychologically healthy stress, it's called eustress. So this idea of distress, this idea of this is wearing on me, this is going on for some time now, this is now becoming chronic stress. That's the type of stress, distress, where we really want to lean in and say, how can I help myself and others? Because this is now not just impacting the here and now temporarily. It's potentially impacting many domains of life, how the person shows up in many, many ways at work, at home, in relationships, in their own self-care. And so we want to work to relieve distress, both for ourselves and others. There are some other key characteristics that are associated with compassion. Sort of went on a little tangent, I think, on unpacking distress, but I thought that was, again, important to this conversation. So some other characteristics of compassion include things like this: a sense of concern. So concern for self and others. Compassion can be thought of as not only a feeling, but a response. So something like empathy is defined as being an awareness, whereas compassion is defined as being a response, again, to potentially observing someone else's suffering or our own. Compassion, again, because of that desire, is a motivation to help others, kind of have that helping mentality. We talk about that a lot in some of our health and wellness programs. How can you have a helping mentality in the workplace, in the workday? When it comes from a place of helping and kindness, it's generally received well. The literal definition of compassion is pretty interesting. It comes from a Latin word that means to suffer with. Compati, I believe, is the root word. Again, I'm mildly obsessed with linguistics, but it means to suffer with someone is that literal translation rather. So it's to really be there with someone. And so, again, maybe not everyone agrees on what that looks like in the workplace and workday, but I would argue that there are opportunities for that. In my line of work, I hear a lot from leaders, bosses, etc., who are maybe on the receiving end of some information from an employee that speaks to the status of their mental health. They will share things like, I'm really not doing well. This is how it's impacting me. I'm concerned about X, Y, or Z. And sometimes when individuals share specifics related to their mental health and or really extreme, intense feelings, those who are hearing that and on the receiving end of that sometimes don't know what to do with it. And they don't know how to be with someone in their suffering. And this actually became a pretty big conversation in a room I was in recently with an employer. And we were talking about what does mental health support look like within the workday? And people have very, very differing opinions on that. About how maybe potentially involved to be and what can I say and what should I not say. And again, I'm here to offer up that there's a lot of possibility, a lot of opportunity for us to be very supportive and to be with people in their suffering, in their distress within the workday. And yes, I think this is something that leaders can positively provide. Again, I just don't think we all have the ability maybe today to sit and be with someone in that way and know how to get through that, know how to be an active listener, know how to reflect back, and know how to connect people to resources and that type of thing. So wanted to talk about that. And then additionally, I think it's important to consider that being compassionate isn't just about one type of suffering. There are multiple ways that people might experience suffering. There might be some kind of physical suffering, mental or emotional. I think this time of year, financial, or maybe in this economic era, financial suffering. So there are a variety of ways we can support, again, ourselves or others in whatever it is they're navigating. And so again, compassion can look a lot of different ways there. So next, let's talk a little bit about how compassion potentially gets expressed. There are infinite ways we can be compassionate as a friend, as a colleague, but I think to maybe oversimplify it for this conversation today, it can be as simple as a random act of kindness. Kindness is a huge pathway, I would say, whether it's in schools or communities or workplaces, to really nurture connection, sense of belonging. I see you. So one of the ways we can really create a workplace and a work day that feels psychologically healthy and feels supportive to others is to make sure that people feel seen. Ideally, people feel seen, people feel safe, people feel heard. But again, perhaps one of the simplest ways for us to approach some of these values that I like to talk about in my work is through acts of kindness. And so you might say, well, how does that actually unfold within the workday? Well, there's a lot of different ways. Personally, I've written programs that encourage random acts of kindness within the workday, that encourage people to be proactive and to identify, maybe it's a certain department within the organization that could use some appreciation, some gratitude, again, kindness is really what it all boils down to. And so there are ways to really nurture that within the workday. A little shout out to the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation. They produce a ton of amazing free content that is available at your fingertips. If you go to the Random Acts of Kindness Foundation's website, there are amazing tools that can be downloaded and used right within the workplace, used right within schools. And it looks like things like posters and challenges and ways to actually embody and practice kindness immediately within each day. Very, very small things that can be chosen to be done. We are going to, in a moment, get into very specific ways to really bring compassion into work and life. But again, I wanted to talk about how compassion is expressed. And again, to oversimplify it, I would describe it as kindness, a sensitivity and kindness to others, especially when there is known distress being navigated. So in preparation for this, I have a creative process that I go through. I find my inspiration for the podcast or the blog or the learning and development that I'm providing. I do my research. I look for what's evidence-based. I look for some anecdotal type of evidence or stories I can share with you. I look for resources, and I also look for science. I also look for what can I learn from a research perspective, like what have people discovered by studying this topic? There's a branch of study, it's evolutionary biology. I think it's really interesting, and it looks at how groups of people evolve and what mechanisms are at play for allowing people to continue to evolve, essentially, and what works. And essentially, things have a function for them to be present, and so it looks at how the function of something is helping groups of people to evolve, I guess is how I would say it. So anyhow, compassion has been researched, and specifically it was researched to see how compassion affects the body and like the physiology of the body, which I think is really interesting. So what has been found is that when people are experiencing or feeling or responding compassionately and having that experience of compassion, the heart rate actually slows down. Something similar happens when we're around animals. Fun fact, so pet owners are thought to have healthier bodies, lower blood pressure, less stress, etc. So it's almost like the body has this relaxation response when we're holding space for other people and acting compassionately. So I thought that was interesting and worth mentioning. It also changes how we respond hormonally. Hormones are fascinating. You know, the more you learn about hormones, yes, there's male and female specific, but there's also hormones that we all experience and produce. And so there's a bonding or love hormone. I call it the cuddle hormone, oxytocin, which our body produces, and it feels amazing. You know, when your body is producing oxytocin, it feels like a love drug almost. It's very pleasurable. As a new mom, the oxytocin was flowing postpartum, thankfully, all day long. So it's really, really a powerful hormone. And again, it's something that increases when we're in a place of compassion and when we are acting compassionately. So I thought that was really interesting. And we know, you know, it probably sounds weird to hear the word pleasure. But another word for pleasure is positive emotion. And if you look at well-being theory, I talk about well-being theory a lot, and Dr. Martin Seligman's work. Well-being theory, I got my tongue tied there. It looks at key drivers influencing human flourishing, experience of great life satisfaction. When we look at that theory, one of the key drivers is positive emotion. So it is critical to our own health and well-being, not just the good of humanity, for us to act compassionately. There are pleasurable emotions that come with that, just like when we volunteer. So it almost has this like protective benefit to us as individuals, which I think is really interesting. There's one other thing. I am going to reference my notes for this so I get it shared out to you correctly. Here it is. I'm also really interested in neuro wellness. So what is going on in the brain? What is going on in the brain when we have certain experiences, or what changes can we expect in the brain as a result of doing certain healthy behaviors? Like when we exercise, for example, we produce something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this is what scientists call miracle grow for the brain. So when we exercise from a neuro wellness perspective, we are producing more of this BDNF, and it has a protective effect on the body. I share all of that because, again, it's interesting how the brain responds to wellness practices. Additionally, we know that there are positive changes to brain matter in following periods of meditation. Like if someone were to establish a meditation practice, do that consistently, positive changes to the brain and the matter in the brain that are correlated to healthy aging and cognition. So anyways, just a couple of examples as I tee up what happens in the brain when we practice compassion. So the areas of the brain related to empathy, caregiving, and again, these pleasurable or positive emotions are really activated in the brain. So from a neurological perspective. Fascinating what happens in the brain, but we also know that feelings are embodied. So we have an experience in the brain, but we're potentially feeling it in a multisensory way. So I wanted to share that. All of that to say that being in a place of compassion, being able to be with someone and supporting them through something challenging or difficult is a win-win-win. And you'll hear me say this all the time. It's a win for you as the individual. It is a win for the culture. And it is a win for the person, obviously, on the receiving end of that random act of kindness. All right. I'm pausing for a hydration break because I've admittedly had a lot of coffee this morning and talking. Practice what I preach, stay hydrated. Let's start to transition into some applications. But ahead of that, one other thought. It is seasonally, if you're listening to this in the winter, it is seasonably a very challenging time for some folks. The reason for that can be the holidays. The reason for that can be financial distress. The reason for that can be seasonal in terms of something like seasonal affective disorder. It's like the seasonally produced or induced feeling of being down because the days are colder and darker and longer. Maybe where you live, you don't have that experience. So for a variety of reasons, people can be suffering in their own way. This is also a topic that has come up in some of the rooms I've been in, especially with people who are talking about the workplace, talking about health and wellness in the workplace and workday. How do we support people? How do we support people this time of year? So again, this is where, for me, compassion is what rises as a potential focus area. I like to assign affirmations to these as well. And so the affirmation I was offering up for this month is that I trust that everyone is doing the best they can. And our best is going to look a little different day to day, depending on what's going on. And for those of us that do have mental health challenges, every day can be a little different. Sometimes feelings persist. Sometimes feelings come and go. When those feelings persist and they're uncomfortable feelings or difficult feelings, it can be extremely challenging to get up and do the workday. So I share all of this because we are in a time of year that is experienced differently by everyone. Think about the holidays and family time. Some individuals, family time is their number one. Quality time with family is their number one. For other individuals, there may not be family. For other individuals, there might be grief or loss. There could be family dynamics that are extremely difficult. You know, there are ways that people experience the holidays that actually send distress through the roof because of, again, those family dynamics, things that are said, feelings that are felt, so on and so forth. So all of this to say, this is a season, this is a time of year where we can be great humans. We can potentially attempt to be our best version of ourselves so that we can help people. You know, we can be supportive to people during what might be a really difficult time. So with that, I'll get into some of my thoughts and insights related on compassion. Again, why it's important, and more specifically, how it gets layered into life and the day. I think from my perspective, this is something I do well, which is the application of information. You know, I deliver educational content, lunch and learns, learning and development, almost every day of the year. So I have a lot of experience with this. And it's one thing to learn and receive information, and it's a whole nother ballgame to actually take action and apply it. So specifically what I speak, I'm interested in giving you ideas that are actionable. So not just why is this a good idea, but how do we actually take it and run with it? So that's a little bit about my approach as a facilitator. And I share that because as you're listening, I'm hoping there will be, again, some nuggets or some ideas, something that you connect with or resonate with and say, yeah, I think I could take that and I could practice that, or I could bring this into my workplace and workday and work that magic. So the first idea I want to explore today is this idea of nurturing not just compassion outwardly or externally, but the topic or idea of nurturing self-compassion as a critical self-care strategy. This is a big topic. Some of us, myself included, are wired in such a way that we are very hard on ourselves. That might look differently. Some people might be hard on themselves in terms of their physical appearance. Some people might be hard on themselves in terms of the quality of their work. Others might be hard on themselves because they take a hyper amount of responsibility for their choices, decisions, energy level, how they do their day, beat themselves up for slowing down and taking a nap when they need it. So we are all potentially self-critical for different reasons or in different ways. I think, or I anticipate, there are people that are maybe less prone to this and people at the other end of the spectrum who are, again, incredibly hard on themselves. And this oftentimes is a private kind of suffering or a private struggle that we might not be privy to unless it's a friend that we're close to who shares with us what some of their self-talk sounds like or looks like. But there are individuals who will be, again, in this place of overthinking and feeling potentially really bad about themselves because of this self-criticism in response to something that happened. Hindsight's 2020, so we can all get to the other side of things and say, man, I wish I would have done this differently, or I learned this, or I learned that. But oftentimes when people are highly emotional and in this reactive, triggered place, logical thought is not at play. Reason is not at play. It's almost like that part of the brain is offline. And so we can get into this place of worry or anxiety coming off of the self-criticism. So I share all of this because self-compassion is really a strategy. More specifically, it's an intervention that we can use, especially those of us that experience extreme self-criticism. It's something essential, in my opinion, to put into our toolkit. Self-compassion could also be described as essentially loving yourself through anything difficult. I could say a lot about that. There are phenomenal experts in this field. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on self-compassion. I would say I aspire to be, because I think the more I learn about it, it is something that could, again, be incredibly instrumental in helping people to process emotion differently. So I do want to read one quote that I plucked for this. Again, an author, Kristin Neff, radical compassion, and again, using self-compassion as a strategy. I'll just read this to you. Self-compassion has been defined as a self-attitude that involves treating oneself with warmth and understanding in difficult times and recognizing that making mistakes is a part of being human. Perfectionism is another topic that ties to this. Those of us that are more perfectionistic, I think is a word, or identify as being a perfectionist, it's exhausting. It is a very exhausting place to live and be. There are some times where that strive for excellence or that desire to have really high quality work or to do our best and to perform our best, to show up at our best, sometimes that is a drive that is productive and healthy. And conversely, it can have this shadow effect that is exhausting and unrealistic, and again, wears and therefore creates human suffering. So if any of that resonates for you, self-compassion is where the magic is. and I offer this up because I do think in the workday, there are so many different ways this can play out. So I'm thinking about the individual who potentially makes a mistake at work. Like, say there's a dropped ball, something gets missed, something isn't handled appropriately, something's late, and they're admittedly or understandably having feelings about it, but instead of being able to talk about it and have a productive conversation about it and process it and take responsibility and get to the other side, it's completely eating them alive. And they're almost in what we call collapse or shutdown, where they can't function really well, or let alone at their best. And so, again, I think in a psychologically safe workplace, we need to be able to talk about when there's issues, when there's a mistake, something doesn't go to plan, something's not handled well. In my business, I operate on what's called EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, and we use the word issues. An issue is like just a known vocabulary word for we need to talk about this. And so I share all of this because I think it's aspirational or desirable. Oh my goodness, I tried to combine the words. Aspirational or desirable to get to a point as a workplace that you can have these hard conversations and someone can say, I'm feeling really upset. I'm not doing well. I made this mistake. I'm very frustrated with myself about this mistake. And it can get talked about. Ideally the person can take responsibility if there is responsibility to be taken, or they can at least express how they're feeling so that we get to the other side of the issue and we don't live in this place of collapse. I think there's a lot of potential there in the workplace, in the workday, if every team could talk through hiccups and issues and mistakes, and it was just sort of a guiding principle or value of like, hey, we're going to act compassionately because we're all human and we're all going to screw up here and there. And we're all going to make mistakes and we're going to support each other through it. And there may be times and places to take responsibility. There might be times and places where it's just an honest human mistake, because that happens. Nobody's perfect. So this idea of self-compassion toward oneself, especially at work when mistakes happen, or in life when there's that uncomfortable feeling, failure, self-doubt, but then also as a team, kind of encouraging people to have self-compassion and then to, again, be there as a team and again, be able to talk through these things, I think could be transformational to the workday. Okay, I feel like I'm getting a little off track. And that's the thing about going live is I got to reel myself in. Only here talking to myself. So I need to get back on track. I'm going to take you into my second thought around bringing this into a place of application. So my second recommendation is to strengthen compassionate communication. This kind of piggybacks on the previous idea or insight. But strengthening compassionate communication as a means for conflict resolution in the workday. So now I'm not just talking about an issue. An issue is like we have something to solve. Conflict resolution is people are having feelings and it's escalating and there's drama. So I just wanted to distinguish between the difference. So I think conflict is an issue, but it's different. This is the human version. And potentially when people are in conflict in terms of relationships at work or in personal lives, oftentimes it escalates. And what happens when things escalate? And what happens when feelings are had and people are speaking freely or even passive aggressively? Things tend to escalate and don't get resolved. They certainly don't get resolved gracefully, but they generally escalate to the outcome that no one is after, which is drama, which is gossip, which is, other poor behavior in the workplace and workday. So compassionate communication is a way of speaking, yes, to yourself, but also to others, so that it creates a productive conversation. It acknowledges the other person's feelings. Again, just because you seek to understand with empathy, or because you reflect back what you're hearing someone say about their feelings, it doesn't mean you necessarily always agree. It doesn't mean that you're taking their side per se on something. You're seeking to hold space for someone, and you're validating how they're feeling, and you're being with them in whatever discomfort they are experiencing. So let me give you a real life application. As a health coach, we are trained in compassionate communication because we are holding space. We are having conversations, meeting with individuals who are sharing very private information with us related to their behavior, related to their health, related to their own thoughts and feelings about their behavior. And sometimes people will share something with us as coaches that is very insightful, very powerful, and explains what type of distress or suffering that person might be experiencing. And so compassionate communication is a tool. It's a way to facilitate dialogue. It's a way to be with that person, again, in their times of distress, in their suffering, in their challenges, in whatever difficulty they are navigating, and reflecting back what you're hearing. Being an active listener means being present with all of your senses, not multitasking and that type of thing. And again, reflecting back the types of insights you're hearing, maybe the other person is sharing. And to oversimplify it, I can think of a time when I was sitting with a client. This person was sharing a lot of personal information about what they'd been through. And it was a whole series of events, and they shared many, many details. And I reflected back quite simply, you've been through a lot this year. I'm not dismissing the many details, but I just wanted to acknowledge, like, that's a lot. You've been through a lot this year. And that client shared back with me in the next session to say, it was such a relief to hear you say that it was a lot. Like it validated, she reported to me that it validated her experience of that year. It felt like a lot. It felt heavy. It felt uncomfortable. It felt difficult to do other things because of that weight. And something as simple as acknowledgement and reflecting back, you've been through a lot, says, I hear you, I see you, I'm with you in this moment. And as a follow-up to that, we can then start to have some productive conversation about what might need to happen for that person to feel supported, for that person to heal, for that person to take care of themselves, for that person to have some hope and some guidance for next steps. So a lot of things can happen. And again, this compassionate communication, it's especially needed when people are navigating change, when there are barriers, when there's past trauma, when there's challenges with self-esteem. You know, we can do our best to be there with that person and to be supportive. The opposite of that would be coming from a place of judgment and saying something like, just get over it. Everyone thinks you're great. You know, that's dismissive. That's not empathic nor compassionate, and it can really shut down conversation. So again, we may not always agree with what someone is providing, but their feelings are their feelings. We can't tell someone else how to feel. We can seek to understand. We can try to be with them, and we can try to get to the other side in the healthiest way possible. So with that, I offer all of that up to say that Communication in general is a very hot topic in the workplace, in the workday. It's something that I get asked to speak on quite often. There are ways we can use our communication that, again, resolves situations, is very productive, very neutral, very direct, and will elicit or produce a really positive, powerful outcome. And there are ways that conversations, yes, of course, can be awkward, but they can also spiral and have the complete opposite effect. I think, again, this is a little more anecdotal. This is based on my experience of stepping into a lot of different industries, a lot of different work days, what people are telling me. I think, or it seems, that there is still massive opportunity for people to build their communications toolkit. How to have difficult conversations, how to have what's also called nonviolent communication. How do we have a conversation about something that we do not agree about and get to the other side of it and have something productive come from it? How do we use tone? How do we use body language? Body language is huge. Body language is like 95% of a person's experience of you. So body language is massive. And some folks don't even have any awareness of how they're presenting in a meeting, you know, when they're in a room full of people, when they're virtual. So communication is huge. I could go on and on about it. I find that people are still needing skills and perhaps confidence around it to apply amazing communication skills, whether in writing or verbally, or having that difficult one-on-one conversation, or again, having a conversation around mental health. What do I say? What do I not say? What's appropriate? What's legal? You know, there are so many things related to communications that, in my opinion, it could be a multi-series training that could really just equip people with lifelong skills. You know, some people are more articulate than others. Some people are more, again, confident speaking in front of people, groups. But I find that it's really those one-on-one conversations that people would much rather avoid than have because of the awkwardness, because they don't know what to say and how to say it. So what we say is the verbal, how we say it is the paraverbal, and again, that body language. So if that's interesting to you, get with me. There's a ton we can do to equip your team. And compassionate communication is a very specific avenue for how to really help people in times of distress. So you can see how in the workplace, or even in, you know, maybe some philanthropic work, that ability to have compassionate communication would be key or critical. So the next application I want to talk about in terms of compassion comes back to that idea of stress, and more specifically distress. So if we as a workplace and we as individuals understand what compassion looks like, how it's expressed, how to communicate and speak, we are going to be well on our way to dealing with chronic stress or distress in the workplace and the workday. So the word mastery, I like the word stress mastery. The word mastery implies that you have the skills at hand immediately for something. Lots of different theories on how many hours or volume of practice it takes to earn mastery in something. But for many people, it's hundreds to thousands of hours practicing something to experience a sense of mastery. So if I'm a martial artist and I have mastery, it means I can bust out my skills right now. I don't have to go watch a video. So I would argue that with stress management, as lots of folks like to call it, it's not an on-demand kind of skill. If it were, I don't think we would see as much unhealthy coping as we see. So drug and alcohol abuse, gambling, shopping, any type of impulsive behavior is generally a coping mechanism and a way to feel better quickly. It's understandable that people want to feel great quickly, but that's oftentimes how people are dealing with the distress of their work and home life is, what can I do quickly to feel better in this moment? And it tends to look like something that comes with some type of risk, as compared to healthy coping, which comes with only rewards or benefits and no long-term risk. So again, I think compassion and potentially having a more compassionate approach to the workday, to how we speak to individuals, to again, embodying and practicing more random acts of kindness, to having these hard conversations. I mean, all of this that I've shared with you so far today is going to support people with stress. And again, in our culture, we use the word stress. It really should be the word distress to refer to it more accurately. But people are stressed. People are suffering. And when we can't talk about it, and when we can't be productive, and when we can't show up for people and say, hey, I see you. I see that you're having a rough week. Can we talk about it? When those things aren't happening, the stress persists. And people are then forced to pretend to be okay and to then leave work or get home for the day and potentially feeling out of sorts, try to figure out how to feel better. And again, that can look really healthy. That can look unhealthy. But then meanwhile, some of these toxic things are persisting in the day. So we have a huge opportunity to really move the needle on stress. But I think it all comes down to these dynamics and these relationships. And again, operating from a place of empathy and compassion. So the last thing I want to talk about today is the opposite of everything I've just said. So like this whole time, I've really been making a case for how do we be more supportive? How do we be more aware? How do we be with people in their discomfort? How do we do that better and more all day long? And how do we build people's skills? We can introduce it as a value. We can introduce it as a skill that we're all going to work to build. We can strengthen our communication. We can have tough conversations. So we've talked about a lot of application in terms of building it and nurturing it and strengthening it. So now I'm going to take the opposite perspective, which is either the workday or the workplace, who is expected to be compassionate inherently in their line of work all day, every day. And so these individuals are therefore experiencing what we call compassion fatigue. So these are generally our caregivers, first responders, people maybe in customer service, member service type things, where they are having to be on all day long. They are having to potentially be on the receiving end of some very unhappy, suffering people who are dissatisfied with something and or navigating a crisis, something emergent. So there are folks who are having this experience of the workday where compassion is expected, compassion is inherent. I think of a mental health therapist who is in therapy, holding space for someone for 8 hours straight. Like, how does the therapist go home and take care of themselves after being in that provider space, being that safe space all day long for someone else? They might go home and say, I have nothing left to give. So anybody who is on, in terms of being people, serving people all day, every day, these individuals are potentially going to go home and say, I have nothing left to give. I am exhausted. I think the highest burnout right now is thought to be in recent years, healthcare. These individuals are really, really, yes, on all day long because they have no choice. One mistake and it could be catastrophic. It could be fatal. And then again, other people are having feelings all day long. And so when you're in that caregiving role or that healthcare role, you're doing your best to manage those family dynamics, those human emotions all day, every day. So I share all of this because we have to think about those professions who are exhausted. They have compassion fatigue. They have nothing left to give. They're potentially wanting to leave the industry and do something else altogether. These individuals don't need to flex that muscle more. They need restoration. They need time off. They need their own caregiver. They need additional mental health services. I'm a huge proponent of this, and this doesn't always get agreed with. I'm a huge proponent that we give people more paid time off, not just PTO, not just comp time, but in those high demand roles, in those, again, first responder, customer service. I know they're very different industries when I say it like that, but when you are with people all day, every day, I think you need additional paid time off, even if it's 15 minutes, to take care of yourself, because you cannot pour from an empty bucket. It's unreasonable. It's completely unreasonable. And we have a major issue with burnout. So burnout is a related topic that's been pretty hot for a while. And we can't expect people to show up and be these, positive, resilient presence for others when they got nothing left to give. And, some of these individuals give all day long and then go home, and you don't know what's going on at home. You don't know if there's an aging parent. You don't know if there's a special needs child. You don't know if there's some financial crisis. So I do think that when we are an employer and we are looking to retain people, better support people, we have to look at their day. Are they running on empty? Can we feed people a healthy snack once a day? That would be worth it. Can we give people 15 minutes of self-care to go and grieve, or go to the respite room and meditate, or just walk outside for 5 minutes? There are people that need the ability to bounce back because they've poured out so much compassion all day long. And so they are needing not to flex that skill more, but they are needing to be restored. And they're potentially needing to be restored physically, mentally, and emotionally. So I think it's our job as leaders, bosses, decision makers, employers, colleagues, to keep an eye on people and say, hey, are you okay? I'm just thinking about you. Do you need a break? Do you need food? Do you need water? Is everything okay? Again, there is a way to be authentic and caring and kind without anybody having to give TMI. You don't have to ask people to spill it all. You don't have to ask people to overshare. You yourself don't have to overshare. But we need to be able to say, I'm not doing well. I'm not doing okay. I'm having a hard time. And the other person needs to know how to respond to that and how to support that person. And know, it's okay. I think there's this, I see it all the time when workplaces are trying to talk about mental health. They'll say, I don't need to know this, or I don't need to know that. And I agree. You don't need to know someone's diagnosis. You don't need to know someone's relationship status. You don't need to know what someone's bank account balance is. But you do need to know if your people are okay. And you do need to be able to ask, hey, are you okay? What might I be able to do for you? And there are some workplaces that do this really well. I should have pulled this up. I'll try to do it from the top of my head. But there are some trauma-informed workplaces that will say things like at every meeting, like, hey, how are you feeling today? What do you need today? Who can you ask for help? Simple questions that don't pry. They're not asking people to overshare. There's no TMI. It's, how are you feeling? What do you need? And who can you ask for help? Small things that make a massive difference and will help you to understand when and if suffering is at play. Okay, I've gone way longer than I intended to go. That's how these things typically go. And I'm just talking by myself, so it would be lovely. I see a couple people here with me live. It would be lovely in future iterations of this for you to be active in the chat, for us to have some conversation, for there to be questions. I'll pause in case there are in this moment, but I would love to get to that where it's more of a community-based conversation as opposed to quote unquote thought leadership or insights. So I will pause there. I'd love to hear from you. Again, am determining the best use of this time, the best use of content, what you all want to hear, and how often to do it. So if you have feedback for me, that would be amazing. Any questions, that would be amazing. I'll just sit tight here for a moment and see if anybody has anything to share. Everybody likes to relax differently, that's for sure. It's funny, I was just having this conversation with someone who said, when I go to the gym, I actually leave feeling more relaxed. And she said that's probably not everybody's experience, but she says for me, it's relaxing. And for me, relaxing looks a little different. For me, I would say my actual go-to preferred way to relax is writing. Absolutely love to write. But people relax in different ways. And some people need different doses of relaxation, I would say as well. So that's the thing about health and wellness, is that it's highly personal. And I think sometimes we expect it to look the same way for everybody, and it may not. It may not. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? I'd love to hear from you. I would actually love for people to email me. My email address is Katy, Katy, at wellnesscollective.com. I would love to hear, again, thoughts on future content, the frequency of this content, and just general feedback about how you think this podcast could continue to evolve. So with that, thank you for being here. I am off to a holiday party. And I'll hopefully see some of you in my Free Fitness Fridays. That's every Friday at noon. Total body workout. It'd be very fun to do as a team. So invite your colleagues, roll out your mat right within your workspace. Don't worry about what other people think. People say that all the time, like, oh, I'm embarrassed to work out in front of my colleagues. I can't tell you how to feel. My coaching or my encouragement would be, don't worry about that. You take care of you. You get your workout in. If other people want to stare at you and judge that, that's on them. But you modeling exercise, you pausing from your workday, you stepping away from your inbox, you having fun with some of your team, doing a workout, getting a sweat session, that to me is more important than what other people think or might judge about the experience. So with that, this is a wrap, and I'll see you next time. Take care.